Y'all ready to be history?
Get started.
Welcome.
Hi.
Hello, everyone.
To the Pro Audio Suite, thanks to Rode Microphones.
These guys are professional. They're motivated.
Introducing Robert Marshall from Source Elements and Someone Audio Post, Chicago. Darren Robbo Robertson from Voodoo Radio Imaging, Sydney. Tech to the VO Stars, George the Tech Whittam from LA. And me, Andrew Peters, voiceover talent and home studio guy.
Line up, ladies!
Here we go.
A couple of weeks back, we did a Rupert Neve special, and one of our special guests was Bill Drescher. Now, we didn't get much of a chance to talk to Bill about his career, and dare I say, it's illustrious, to say the least. So we've asked Bill to come back, which he has decided to do, which is surprising.
After that drubbing.
That's right, absolutely.
I'm back.
He's back. Welcome back, Bill.
Thank you very much. Good to be back.
Now, I want to go right the way back because it could be an interesting journey of yours. You were still playing in bands when Sound City opened. Is that correct?
Yeah. Our band was actually we walked through the door on day one, and got our pick of all this Vox equipment, and we rehearsed, and there was different incarnations of the bands at the time, but I started there actually as an employee in the summer of '69, and sort of transitioned from being a musician in a band to a producer engineer behind the glass.
You weren't playing a six-string, were you? That would work in really well with Bryan Adams.
Yeah, that's right.
Exactly. No, I was mainly a bass player, but as a kid, I had 4 years of piano and I had a year of guitar. And I also played a little drums. So I some bands you'd switch around and you'd play a little bit of everything. So, have a basic knowledge of those four things.
So your first memory of walking into the building which became Sound City?
I have early memories of, there was only a Studio A. There was a Studio B, but no control room. There was a lot of open space. It was filled up with a lot of instruments. There was a big sort of machine room full of EMT plates, mic lockers and tape vaults and that type of stuff.
Yeah, because that used to be the Vox factory, or was it a Vox?
It was their actually recording studio, and it was managed by a guy named Bill Page, who was a woodwinds player, and he played with Lawrence Welk, but he also had his own band. And it was the Bill Page Ampliphonic Orchestra, and they had all these little Vox amps and Vox music stands. And so he was the studio manager when Joe took over. And I think Bill stayed there for another couple months or so, and then he left. And it was Joe Leahy sort of managed it after that. He was a good friend of Joe Gottfried's.
Because you always think about Vox, Vox amplifiers, guitar amps, because they were the ones who actually, I think it was it the Shadows who talked to them about making their amplifiers louder because the gigs were getting more and more noisy.
That's good.
I think that's what happened, and they changed made obviously their amps louder.
Wow!
But you never kind of think of them making music in a studio.
Yeah, when we walked in there, I mean, we had our pick of all this stuff, like I said, and as a bass player, I of course had to have two Super Beatles. So
yeah,
it was loud, but not a great sound. And the Vox factory was actually right down the street, maybe a couple miles west on Roscoe Boulevard, and we'd have to go down there occasionally to get parts or whatever. And they had a really classic looking Super Beetle in the showroom that was made out of clear acrylic plastic. That was pretty neat to look at. Yeah.
Very tasty.
Yeah.
So what was the studio like before the Neve and everything went in?
Originally, there was an Electrodyne console in there. Oh. And I think it was maybe, 20 inputs or something. And it was always breaking down all the time. It had a lot of plug-in op amps that would just crap out, and you'd have to pull them out and reseat them. And, I can remember one time I was setting up for a pretty big orchestra session. A cartridge guy came in and picked up the telephone to use it, set the telephone down, and the whole console crapped out. Right? So then you're just scrambling, to try and get the thing back online, and luckily it did, but it wasn't good.
What would crap out on a console like that? I'm just curious.
Well, usually I think it was where the op amps were seated in the connectors that they were pretty heavy and they'd sort of flop around, and so I think that was the main problem.
You can just imagine the signs put up, we're about to record, do not open the fridge.
Yeah, don't touch anything.
But that kind of crap continues. It's like,
It does.
I can think of in the winter time, especially when you have your computer far away from where you're working, so you have a long USB run, and then it gets dry, and the wrong person walks through the threshold of the door, and no mouse. And then it's a big pain in the ass to get the mouse back. Usually a reboot at least.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm so used to that from the digital domain and the computer world that I spend my life in. So that's why I was so curious what kind of things that I'm familiar with went wrong back in the day,
The same stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, I still run across, things crapping out, even on modern consoles, like at Henson, there'd be switches, bus switches and EQ switches that no matter how many times you exercised them, they just would not get happy, and so then you switch to a different mic pre, and maybe that one was bad too, and so then you'd have to go to an outboard Neve mic pre, and
oh no,
and finally, you got a clear signal. But,
Oh man,
Yeah.
and what board is that?
SSLG.
Okay,
Yeah, it's a
Got some
great
years on
sounding
it.
console.
yeah.
And it works really good. It replaced the Neve that was in there. And the Neve at the end had a lot of problems and things crapping out and getting distorted and,
Which Neve was it? Was it like a V or was it a...
No, it was pre-V, that's for sure. I don't remember the number of it.
Like a Rupert Neve.
Yeah, with the jukebox thing on the left-hand side, and I think it was the 4-band EQs that were in it.
Yeah, that was one of the early ones, because that was A&M before it came
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So going back to Sound City, though, do you remember the early bands that you recorded? And do you remember who they were?
Some of the first bands that, that I recorded were actually bands that I was in because I was learning at that point. But some of the other bands that, when I was maybe 21 or something, we did Neil Young. We did that Spirit record, 12 Dreams of Dr. Sardonicus. Nils Lofgren, Crazy Horse.
Chipmunks, right?
That was later. That's why I sent you the discography stuff, because I can't remember it all.
So what is the Chipmunk sound? Is it recorded, just recorded slow and then played fast?
Exactly. That's exactly it. Yeah.
So here's a question that you may not want to answer, but I don't think it's any secret on this show. I'm pretty sure I've revealed before that my first ever audio gig was in radio, and on my very first day, I managed to erase a 15-inch, quarter-inch tape that was full of promo masters. I put the wrong tape box in the bulk eraser. Are there any spectacular whoops moments from your first few sessions at Sound City?
Well, yes and no. I mean, back when there wasn't a lot of money coming into the studio, the owners would try and, cut corners and wherever they could. And this one time I was doing a band called Ethos, a sort of progressive rock band that was very good. And Joe Godfrey had given me a bunch of reels of tape to use, and he was billing the client, for a new tape. And as we're recording, and it was a really good take that we were doing, I happened to look over at the machine, and I'm seeing splices go through.
Whoopsie-daisy.
Oh.
Yeah.
And my heart just sank, and I think I broke out into a sweat, and I knew this wasn't going to be good. And sure enough, we go to play it back, and there's slice goes by. There's a slight drop out. The producer's going, what the hell was that? Right? And I'm going, well, here's what's going on, And so that was a really big disaster,
Ouch.
But, there was another time that at Sound City, and I wasn't engineering this session. Another engineer, Gary Brandt, was doing it. And he was doing Frank Hoffman, who was Dustin Hoffman's cousin. And at the end of the session, and Frank had been, we'll just say, partying for a long time, right? So at the end of the session, which is like now 5 a.m, Gary takes Frank's tapes out to the office, fill out the paperwork, and Gary puts Frank's tapes on top of somebody else's tapes. Frank goes to leave, picks up the whole pile, and Gary says, no, you've got, somebody else's tapes there. And Frank flips out, opens up his briefcase and pulls out a gun. And, and then he calls the police department and says he's holding the engineer hostage at Sound City, and he wants an armored car for him and his tapes, or he's going to kill the engineer.
What? Oh, my God.
Yeah. And so the SWAT squad came and and finally one of the police put his hands through the mail slot in the door, held Frank's hands. They said the Lord's Prayer, and Gary, the engineer, runs out the back door. And so Frank goes to jail for this, of course, and he gets out of jail and he comes back to the studio and he wants to book time with Gary again. Gary and Joe Godfrey both go, sorry, we're booked.
Yeah. We're booked until when's the next Millennium again?
Yeah.
Holy
How long
cow.
are you planning on living? Yeah, okay, we'll do it after that then.
Yeah.
Back then, there was just so much craziness and wacky stuff going on. There'd be fights. There'd be way too much drugs, and it was just crazy, crazy times.
I remember being at Sigma Sound and finding out, hearing about this whole concept that the celebrity or the star, that whatever, they never carried any drugs.
Yeah.
There was somebody else who was carrying the drugs.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Those bad
The
influencers.
Candyman, or whatever they
Yeah.
would call him,
Or Mr. Nice, I think, was another term used. Yeah.
I was 22-year kid out of college, my first internship. I'm just like eyes like saucers. Like, this is what happened. Oh my God.
So probably one of the, getting back to Sound City again, but one of the most significant things that came out of Sound City was probably the recording of Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks for the Buckingham Nicks record. Were you involved in that record?
No, that was strictly a Keith Olsen project.
Do you remember anything about those sessions, though? You would have been around, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I just remember that it sounded really, really good, and it was very different for its time. So it was a treat to hear it. Keith Olsen also, back in the 60s, he was partners with a guy named Kurt Betcher. And Kurt Betcher was a brilliant vocal arranger and vocalist. He had done a lot of the association stuff. But they did a project called the Millennium for Columbia Records. And it was a groundbreaking record that unfortunately never saw the light of day. And I believe Keith, at the time, he was able to hook up either 2 8-tracks or 2 16-tracks, which was pretty forward-thinking back then to get those machines to lock up. When I first heard that record from Keith, I realized that he was super talented and had a lot of great knowledge. I think I only seconded a couple sessions because I was instantly sort of thrown into being an engineer. But one I did assist was for Keith when he did Dr. John the Night Tripper. And so that was kind of an early seconding project that I had.
Because that record even though the record itself didn't do much, it was the beginning of, Fleetwood Mac becoming a mega band. And it was a chance meeting that Mick Fleetwood just happened to hear the record when he was there at Sound City looking for somewhere to record.
Yeah. And the guy that actually produced Rumors, Richard Dashett, he was working at Sound City. He was my assistant a lot of the time. So he went from being an assistant and riding a bicycle to, producing Fleetwood Mac and becoming a multi-gazillionaire.
Wow.
Yeah.
So which album of Fleetwood Mac's was recorded at Sound City? Because I know we touched on this last time we spoke.
It was the very first one. I think it was just called Fleetwood Mac.
Yeah, okay. And then Rumours was done at the Village.
Right.
Cool. So when they were recording the sessions for Fleetwood Mac, the Fleetwood Mac record, you would have obviously been privy to quite a bit of that being recorded. So do you remember much at all?
Those were pretty much closed sessions, and you didn't really, want to pop in and it just wasn't done. And another record that Keith did there in Studio A that was a great record was the Grateful Dead Terrapin Station record.
Well, I'm looking at this discography, and I can't.
I'm rolling.
I can't.
This is a long
I
discography.
keep looking like, holy cow! I'm looking at names in here: Evel Knievel, Bill Cosby.
What did you do with Evel Knievel? I was going to get to that when we got there, but
he was going to jump over the Snake River, and so he signed. I forget the record company, but Ron Kramer, a good friend of mine, was producing it and was head of the company. And so it was kind of a thing where, well, if he dies to jump in the river, we're going to sell a lot of records, right?
It was a spec project. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
You were betting on him fighting it on the river.
Well, I wasn't betting it. I didn't know.
No. I wouldn't mean that.
But I think that's kind of the gist of it. But of course, he crashed, but he lived. So that was kind of the end of the thing. And we recorded a couple songs for it, and we had a live audience of kids one day, and then another night we had a live audience of adults. And so actually, Evel Knievel kind of contradicted himself several times within those 2 days. And so it was a lot of editing to make it sound right. And then the story that I heard after that when Kurt Cobain recorded at Sound City, he was an Evel Knievel fan, and supposedly he stole the tapes out of the library.
Oh, wow.
Is that right?
Yeah, I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what I heard. So.
You can imagine when Evel Knievel arrived at the studio, and you can just hear the person at the front desk saying, "I wish Evel Knievel would use the front door like everybody else."
I'd like to hear the intercom page. Hello, everybody involved. Evil's here.
Yeah, that's right. Evil's at the front door.
Evel Knievel.
Evil's at the front desk.
That's Mr. Evil to you, right?
So do you know Jeff Silverman?
Oh, of course. Yeah. Absolutely. Super talented guy.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, actually, Jeff had a solo production deal out of Sound City, which the production company is called Carmen Productions. And I produced and engineered Jeff's solo project. And that's how Jeff and I actually met.
And that was in the mid-'70s, is that right?
Yeah, probably late 70s, maybe early 80s. Yeah.
Yep, we've talked to him here on our show. Was it more than once now?
A couple times.
Yeah.
He's been on like 3 times or 2 times.
Yeah, quite a few times, indeed. So what were some of the early sessions that were memorable at Sound City?
Well, a lot of them were memorable for different things. I mean, you talk about like the Chipmunks and different speeds and playing back at different speeds, whatever. But I did a couple projects with Mel Blanc, of course, did all the Looney Tune characters.
Yeah.
And he had a whole formula for every one of his characters. And he had all the VSO settings, Yosemite Sam was minus 20%, and this guy was minus 30%, and da-da-da-da-da. And so I thought that was kind of interesting. And he was just a super nice guy and really talented.
Was he really techie?
I don't know that he was technical, but I think that he had done it for so long, and maybe he'd worked with like one engineer, and together they came up with these formulas of doing these particular characters. And so wherever he went, he said, "Okay, this is how we do this character. Set the VSO at this." And so mixing the London Symphony Orchestra for Four Musketeers was a real hoot. That was a a great experience because I was probably just, in my early 20s, and just so many of them were great. Working with Spirit was incredible. And
I'm actually curious about Neil Young because I've heard numerous stories about people working with him. What was your experience like?
it was different.
Different than other people's.
I worked a lot with David Briggs, who produced Neil Young and Spirit and Alice Cooper and Neil Olsen, all these people, right? So one of the first things we did with Neil was we remixed Cinnamon Girl. And so then after that, Neil wanted to start a new record. And by then we had Studio B up and running with a new control room. And I set it up for a whole band, because I knew it was going to be Crazy Horse and all that. So Neil walked in and said, "Oh, no. We're not going to do this." Right? He said, "We're going to mic up the band and we're going to put it through my Shure Vocal Master PA. And then we're going to mic the PA and that's going to be the record." I said, "Oh my God." And so I went out on a limb. I was just a kid, and of course he's Neil Young. And I told Neil and I told David, I said, "In my opinion, this isn't going to sound very good, but if you want to go down that road, we will." And so we went down that road and it sounded horrible. Right? And that's the last time I saw Neil.
Oh, no. Don't you wish it was like if it was the modern era, you could have so easily just recorded ISO tracks of all the mics, and you could have saved the session, and nobody would even known the wiser, because you just do it in the console, they'd have no idea.
Yeah, exactly.
But back then, it would have been a big deal.
Yeah.
I just find it extraordinary. He came in and said, "We want to record through the PA." That's bizarre.
Yeah, it'd be hard even these days, to get the PA out of the recording. It'd just get all over all the mics.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, what a mess.
I was disappointed that he wanted to do it that way, but, he was Neil Young and I'm just a kid. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, who's going to argue, right? Yeah, exactly.
Not me.
No, totally not.
At least he didn't be like, "Who told you to do that?"
Yeah.
Well, this is kind of off topic a little bit, but when I'm looking at the discography and I see Rick Springfield, Working Class Dog, and this is on discogs.com, it'll show 47 versions. What does that mean? Some of them I see LP, album, then I see promo, I see descriptions, and then each of them have their own unique catalog number. How in the hell does one hit or one song have 47 versions?
I don't know, to tell you the truth. And, I've seen different versions of it where I'd been credited with doing Hall & Oates, right? And I thought, I've never done Hall & Oates, right? But I did try and suss it out, and it was on Discogs, and it was because some record that Hall & Oates did was like an 80s comp, and so then somehow they gave me credit for Hall & Oates. I think you'd have to look at each of those 47 entries and figure out why it's different. I really don't know.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Do you know what also is really interesting, talking about Rick Springfield? And I was talking, funny enough, to Jeff the other day, and I said to him that, that Rick is not really that famous in Australia. Zoot was a band that was back in the late 60s, early 70s. And most people are either my age or dead that used to go and see them. And then he had like 2 hits. He had one kind of mid-70s hit, the big hit in the 80s, Working Class Dog, Jessie's Girl. And that was kind of it. And yet he's huge in America.
Yeah.
It wasn't kind of it, that was it.
Yeah, go figure.
I also want to know about working with Barry Manilow. There's a name that comes up on there a lot. What was it like working with him?
It was different. It was great because Barry's a really cool guy, super nice. The only sort of issue was that he has a different sort of style of production than I do. So
aesthetically, just like, his taste. Is that what you mean?
Exactly. And so at times, I can remember one time when I kept wanting to do a part over and over and over. And because I didn't think it was quite there yet, with a guitar player or something. And I think he might have gotten a little frustrated. And I remember him hitting the talkback one time and him saying to the guitar player, Bill would like you to do it again. Uh-oh.
Yeah.
But for the most part, working with Barry was just a real delight. And he was super gracious to me in the end. And I can't say enough good things about him, really.
Maybe he was a little more jazz and you were a little bit more pop rock. Like you wanted the take to be nailed, and he wanted it to be a little more organic. Would that be a way to say it? I don't even know if that's
exactly.
fair
He
to
was
say.
more of like a live feel kind of guy, and I was more like a work it to death, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Make it perfect. Yeah.
Yeah.
Another project that was pretty special to me was I mixed Don Ellis live at the Montro Jazz Festival, and this was when he was this was his last record, and he was dying at the time, actually. So it kind of has really special meaning to me, but really talented, super guy.
1978.
Yep, sounds about right.
What are the are they projects from? I should know this, but Korea or Japan?
As far as a lot of the Asian stuff I've done,
Yeah.
most of it's. I think I've only done a couple Korean things, but I've done a ton of Chinese and almost as much Japanese over the years. And I'm doing a Japanese project right now, actually.
Do you speak any of those languages? Just enough to communicate, or?
I can say like big speakers and little speakers and one more time. And
Yeah.
That's all you need. Yeah.
I can never not think of the movie Lost in Translation. Yes.
Yeah.
Where he's trying to explain, the Japanese director's explaining how to hold a glass of whiskey. It just makes me think of that. Yeah, just in reverse.
I can remember seeing that film, and it was like I was seeing my life after shooting a commercial in Seoul some years before, and it was exactly the same. I'm on set, and the director, who can't speak English, well, he could actually speak English, but he didn't want to, so we had a translator. And then the one day he decides he feels more comfortable, he spoke to me in English, and I turned to the translator and said, "What did he say?" He was so offended. That was the end of that relationship.
Oh,
that's for sure. Oops. So back to your career. What was the big turning point? What was the one thing that put you into a different level?
Well, it's got to be Rick Springfield. I mean, I'd by the time I did Rick, I'd already been producing and engineering for 10 years. And, I'd sort of built up, credibility because I had actually more hits as an engineer mixer, but not quite as a producer. But then after I did Working Class Dog with Rick and, of course, Keith, that's when I sort of, for quite a while, just engineered the projects that I was actually producing. And I didn't engineer for other people for, I don't know, probably 10 years or something like that. But after a while, the producing thing sort of tapered off. So I'm back to, doing a lot of mixing and engineering for others, which is fine too, because I get a lot of creative enjoyment out of doing that, absolutely.
I was going to say, which one do you prefer, producing or engineering?
That'd be a tough call because I really like doing both. And some projects producing turn out to be a lot of man hours compared to what it used to be. And, even the mixing stuff is, but you don't have to sit there and, try and do the actual production side of it.
Which is less stressful to you?
Mixing.
Yeah.
Yeah, mixing or recording engineering.
Because you don't have the weight. You don't have the weight of the whole project on your shoulders, I guess. It's just
exactly. When you're producing and engineering, you're doing two jobs, and if you have to deal with a record company or production coordinators, you got a lot on your plate.
How much involvement did the record companies used to have in the early days?
Quite a bit. I mean, like with Rick. Eddie DeJoy, who was the VP of A&R at RCA, he had quite a bit of input into songs, like maybe in the final mixes, that type of stuff. The promo departments had a lot of input into it. And quite often you'd make what you'd think would be a really great record, and the head of promo just didn't hear it. And so that was the kiss of death. They just wouldn't put it out there.
Wow.
But interestingly enough, Eddie DeJoy, he actually signed Cat Stevens too. I think it was Chelsea or wherever it was at the time. So he was responsible for Cat Stevens being a big hit. But Eddie DeJoy and Bud Dane, also at RCA at the time, they both quit RCA shortly after Rick, and they went on to manage the Chipmunks.
Oh, really?
And me, actually.
Is that right?
So there's the Chipmunks connection.
It's all like 5 degrees related to the Chipmunks. No.
Yeah. So what was the next stop after Sound City?
After Sound City, that was the last studio that I worked at as an employee. And after that, it was just that, I would go to the Village or whatever, and I would rent the studios because now I was a producer. I was the client. So I'd be at the Village or Soundcastle or, A&M or, wherever.
What was your favorite studio back in the, let's say, early 80s?
I guess early 80s, it'd probably be the Village, because I didn't start working at A&M until the early 90s. And that instantly became my favorite place and still is my favorite place.
What makes it special?
All the rooms are really, really good, especially A and D. And consoles are great. The staff is great. Everything is maintained really well. Very accommodating staff. Like if you have a big tracking date, you get multiple assistants on the project. And it's just a really class act.
Also see you've had a bit of a connection, apart from Rick Springfield being an Aussie, with a few other Aussies. And there's 3 that stand out. And a mate of mine, when he knew I was talking to you today, Bill, wanted to know how you came across Mondo Rock.
I was managed by a guy at the time, Michael Lembo. He introduced me to Steve Robowski at, I think it was EMI or Columbia, whoever was interacting with the Mondos at the time. And so Steve got me to do the Mondo Rock project.
And you came to Australia to do that, is that correct?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think we were there for like 2 months.
And you, from memory, I did actually ask Ross, who's the main guy from Mondo Rock, Ross Wilson, where it was recorded, but he hasn't got back to me. But I've got a feeling it would have been Metropolis.
Could have been. I seem to remember it was like kind of like an upstairs room with a smaller SSL. And God, Angus Davidson was our assistant. That's about all I remember about it.
Oh, okay. Well, upstairs room, that's not Metropolis, because Metropolis used to be downstairs, so it could have been Sing Sing or somewhere, I'm not sure. But I know that Metropolis was an amazing old studio, and Bowie recorded there, Mick Jagger recorded there.
What was the one down at Piermont? That was upstairs?
In Sydney.
In Sydney. Is it Rhino upstairs?
No, right, that was Festival or EMI, I think.
Festival.
Yeah, Festival,
yeah,
I
EMI.
think, yeah. Yeah, it must have been one of the other ones. I'll ask Ross anyway and find out where it was. Were you happy with that record?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It was a great thrill to work with those guys and, stay in Australia for a couple months. And we had an apartment in South Yarra.
Yeah.
And so it was a great experience. Yeah.
You'd have been a neighbour of Neil Finn because he was living in South Yarra at that time, I think.
I'm a big fan of his. I would have loved to meet him.
They're touring again. They're actually currently on tour in New Zealand.
What, the house?
Yeah, Crowded House, yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Nice.
So do you prefer tracking or mixing if you had, just as far as the engineering side of things goes?
Wow. There again, it's, I like both of them because a really good tracking session, when you get really good players in there, it can just be magical and so exciting. But the mixing thing I really enjoy too, because it's such a creative reward to actually build something and mold something. Out of, you just get a bunch of tracks. Like this project I'm on now will probably be, each song will be over 100 tracks and maybe like 130 tracks.
Wow.
So
Are you all in the box, I assume?
I have a Mac Pro with two HDX cards, so I can, because this project is 32 192, so I need to do 256 voices if I can. So
It's 32-bit 192K?
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
All those tracks at that high bit rate, high sample rate.
Yeah.
Is that considered at this point de rigueur? Like at this point, if you're going to record an album, yeah, that's what you're going to do, 32, 192?
Well, no, she's the only one that, her name is Mari Hamada, really talented lady. And she likes to put out high-def CDs in Japan. Is why we used to be 24/48, but for the last 2 or 3 records now, it's been the high-def thing. And
What's the medium? Because that wouldn't be red. What do they call it?
DSD?
Yeah, DSD.
I don't know. She just told me a high-def CD, so I don't know.
There's DVD audio.
And yeah, all the high def CD standards are gone
They died.
in the US. So I wonder if it's a Blu-ray thing.
Could be.
Could be.
Yeah. But she's been, I think her first big hits were like in the early 80s, mid 80s, and she was known as the Japanese queen of heavy metal. So we're still kind of doing, like maybe half the record is very heavy metal. The other half is very hard rock.
Wow.
That's great.
Yeah.
So for a hard rock album, 132 channels still seems like a lot. What's on the tracks?
Besides, the basic stuff of like maybe drums being on 12 tracks or whatever. And she does all of her own background vocals. And before she was a rock star or whatever, she was a session singer. So she sings all these parts by herself. She's very good at it. And she doubles, triples all these parts. So there can be, 30 tracks of background vocals. And she likes to put on a ton of keyboards and a ton of guitars. So there can be like, 20, 25 tracks of, guitars and just keyboards, another 25. And so it just adds all up,
Yeah.
A lot of sound effects stuff. And
Does she record all that herself, or is she? Do you know?
it varies. Like some I'll do here, like at Henson, and now because of the pandemic, a lot of it we're just sending out to different players and having them send the files back. And she actually does all of the editing because she's very particular about what she wants to hear and what performances and all that. And she's very good at Pro Tools.
God, managing 132 tracks and trying to edit and all the rest of it at once, that's crazy.
So she already probably like lays out somewhat of a direction in that as she's monitoring, she might, because if you're dealing with that many vocals, sometimes it's like, what do they mean to happen here? Where is the lead? You're dealing with so many stacked up things. There's multiple ways to, you know what I mean?
Actually, when she delivers whatever finished parts to me and says, okay, do the mix now, or if she sends me the whole entire song, which can be like 130 tracks, it isn't close. It's really, I really have to start from scratch.
Wow.
Because she just can't take another week to rough mix a song to give it to me.
So she must, with all those vocal tracks then, she must be labeling everything like specifically, like as Robert's saying, because otherwise how are you picking what's a lead and
well, it's easy to pick out the lead and it's labeled correctly and there'll be doubles and there'll be like a lead vocal overlap and a double overlap. There'll be harmony overlaps sometimes. And so everything's laid out and labeled pretty good, but everything needs to be extensively EQ'd and extensively automated. So when I get 130 tracks, I can spend 5 days mixing it.
It's crazy when you think about the luxuries today and what we were talking about at the beginning of your career, in the late 60s, early 70s. Mine started in sort of the late 80s. Even back then, you were still only talking, 16, 24 tracks. And now all of a sudden,
48.
All these few years later, or 48. Now, only a handful of years later, we're talking about 132. It's just crazy, isn't it?
That's, and look it up. There's an artist in England named Jacob Collier, who he's a, self-producer, and he's notorious for doing 1,000-track tunes.
Wow.
Holy crap.
But you remember 10cc when they did I'm Not in Love? The process of getting that vocal down was unbelievable.
Yeah. I remember on the last record that I did with Mari, which was about, I don't know, year and a half ago, whatever it was, one song had 27 meter changes within one song.
That sounds like a Frank Zappa tune.
Yeah.
Yes, it does.
When I printed all the mixes back into the session and sent her the file, right? For the one song, it was 25 gigabytes. That's how much information was in there.
Wow.
When you were doing multi-tracks, did you used to do like a rough mix or a mix of certain components and mix them down and bounce them down so you can free up some space on the multi-track?
Occasionally, but not too much when it was single 24. And we quickly got into dual 24s. Then we got into a 3348 with a 24. And then or 324 tracks. So,
Yeah.
But you'd end up making A reels and B reels, and so you would, combine stuff, onto the B reel, just for monitor purposes,
Right.
So you didn't have to run 2 reels the whole time, like when you're trying to overdub stuff.
Yeah, because when you mentioned the drum mics, you said 17 or something tracks for the drums.
Yeah, maybe like overheads, hi-hat. Maybe 3 or 4 ambient mics. So, and with Pro Tools, you just throw that all on a separate track, and deal with it later.
Because it's funny, because I was talking to, once again, Jeff Silverman's coming up a lot in this. He has just been, I hope I can talk about this, but he's been sent some master reels from Chris Brubeck, Dave Brubeck's son. He was sent actually the mono track. And it was interesting because the other tracks that Chris has were recorded on 3-track tape.
Wow.
Which Jeff had never heard of, 3-track tape.
There's 3-track. Jim Reeves, a buddy of mine, worked in New York in the 60s, and they had 3-track with like a 3-track console too.
Yeah, because it was owned by Ampex, the Ampex 3-track machine.
Wow.
Yeah.
There you go.
I think when I first started, 4-track was like the smallest I'd seen. And at the same time, we had a 1-inch 8-track. So
yeah. But I've got some photographs of those sessions when they were recording that record. And from the photographs I've looked at, and I could be completely wrong, but it looks like they've actually mic'd the drum kit with one mic.
I could see that. Mm-hmm. Maybe did they have a kick mic also or not?
Didn't look like it. It looked like one mic that was centered, facing, like looking at the drummer, basically.
Uh-huh.
It's like the Beatles 3-mic setup,
Yeah. Or Eddie Kramer with Led Zeppelin. I think that was 3 mics as well, wasn't
it? I'm not sure about that one, but we could ask him.
Yeah. Yeah, give him a call. Quick, Eddie, get him on the line.
Just give me a quick bell. That's fine.
I have him on speed dial.
Yeah, of course. Yes. Well, what's the most minimal setup you've ever recorded? Do you remember?
Oh, God, I don't think I've ever done a minimal setup.
Yeah. Is there such a thing?
Maybe in the very early days, when, like if I was learning and I was on 4-track, but I think even at that time, I think I used too many mics on drums, and if you only have 4 tracks, you don't need a shitload of microphones.
Maybe the most minimal one was the Neil Young setup.
Yes.
There you go.
2 mics on a Shure Vocal Master.
Well, that was fun. Is it over?
The Pro Audio Suite recorded using Rode NTG5s and Source Connect. Edited by Andrew Peters and mixed by Voodoo Radio Imaging with tech support from George the Tech Whittam. Don't forget to subscribe to the show and join in the conversation on our Facebook group. To leave a comment, suggest a topic, or just say g'day, drop us a note at our website, theproaudiosuite.com.